10 sets per week is not low volume, it's baseline volume. Hey everybody, I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. All right, here's the thing. Historically, the idea that 10 sets is low volume has never really been a thing. It seems like a very modern idea. You know, when you start proposing 8 sets, 10 sets, whatever, even 12 sets a week, people start saying, well, you know, that's really kind of low volume. And it's only because we've gone back into a phase of high volume training. And we need to be very, very clear here. These things undulate in waves. Even when I got into lifting over 20 years ago, this was already talked about, of how this went in cycles in the lifting community, the bodybuilding world, the hypertrophy world, everything else, right? That this went in cycles all the time. It was always volume versus intensity, back and forth in terms of coming into vogue over and over and over. And it had been doing this long before I got into lifting. And we're still seeing it. And it seems like right now we're back into one of these phases due to, again, I want to be clear, one specific circle of evidence-based people who have a large following and presence on YouTube and other social media. Okay? But we need to also be clear, this is an area of conflicting science. This is not one of these cases where, you know, there's a big scientific consensus, because sports sciences are far from evolved. They're not even considered to be that good a science by other researchers and people who look from other areas into the exercise science world. They're kind of like, this is not really that scientific, right? Not considered that great. And again, it's due to funding, due to size of studies and stuff when it comes to gaining muscle, right? There's just lack of funding to fund stuff appropriately. So yes, there are massive conflicting ideas, and different circles of researchers are producing vastly different results. So we need to be very clear on that. But historically, people have been saying for a long time, even evidence-based circles, what it is it that we have said for a long time. And this was being said 10 years ago. All your circles were saying, look, optimal training volumes for hypertrophy, depending on how hard you train, seem to be between somewhere in 10 to 20 sets a week per muscle group. 10 to 20 sets. And no, that doesn't mean just your isolation work. We're talking your overall work, right? This is understood. It's somewhere between 10 and 20 sets. Some muscles will benefit from a little more. Some it's going to depend on how hard you train. But that's the optimal range. So then people say, well, so that means if I go to 20, it's better than 10. Well, no, it may not be any better at all. That's kind of the point of the optimal range, right? We have a range. But the facts are, when we talk about that optimal range, it's not to make good gains. That optimal range is squeezing out that last percent. People have always successfully gained muscle on less than 10 sets a week, including even some pro bodybuilders. Now, granted, some of them would only argue their sets to failure counted, but I mean, could we make a point for some of that? Okay, like people will point that out with Dorian Yates, and I used to also, that he would do 4 sets of barbell rows and only count one of them and say, well, I did 1 set, because he did one really hard set where he did 10 reps, and then he did rest pause to get more reps with 405. But I'm like, but he also did 3 sets of 8 as a warm-up with 405. In what world is that not a work set? Well, in a way, it pretty far from failure. In other words, if on a 4 set you can do 10 and then do rest pause work, that's probably not even your true 10 rep max. So sets of 8 are what, 3-4 reps from failure? We're borderline warm-up sets. So even then we would point out, well, he really did closer to 15 sets a week like the other bodybuilders of the era. But that's not 30. Again, he's in that 10 to 20, even the non-failure sets that are 3 or 4 reps in reserve, those being counted were putting him at about 15 or 16. Okay? Let that be clear. And even back then, it was still normal. A lot of bodybuilders were really focused on recovery at that time. Their workouts were less than an hour. And I think that's another point that needs to be made with a lot of this too. Your workouts shouldn't need to be over an hour. If you can't get it done in an hour, you're probably goofing off. Now, granted, that's me sometimes, you know. I tend to take longer breaks than I need to. But, you know, the thing is, people have always been able to do well in those sort of volumes. And then when you look at studies, there are plenty of studies on trained lifters where 5 or 6 sets produce very robust muscle growth. We've all had clients who made great gains with lower volumes. And we saw that a while back, the whole Martin Burkham thing, lean gains. He had people doing low volumes. Paul Carter's doing the lower volumes. So I would consider under 10 to be low volume. But does it work? Yes. If you train hard enough, people make phenomenal gains on 5 or 6 sets a week. We have scientific data confirming this. We have tons of real world results confirming this. All right? 10 sets isn't low volume, it's your baseline. It is the lower end of what experts were saying for years is the optimal range. It's the starting point of the optimal range. So people need to drop this idea that that's some sort of lower volume. When keeping in mind, there's people way more jacked than most of you who do 6 sets. All right? And I'm not exactly tiny or small here at 47. I know people more jacked than me. I've known people in the past with better physiques than I have. Not just in terms of aesthetics, but just overall their chest, their arms, all that stuff. Bigger than mine. Okay? Who train less than 10 sets a week for decades. So, it's just something to consider here. So people need to drop this idea. All right, 20 sets is really high volume. 10 is kind of baseline. And that's what I would say to most people. 10 is your good starting point. Work with 10 sets per week, per muscle group, and then assess your results. And then you can scale up or down from there. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.